It's March 18th of 1919, and you're at one of the best jazz clubs in New Orleans. The music is swinging and the booze is flowing, but there's an overwhelming air of dread that leaves the drinks tasting sour in your mouth. As the clock ticks closer and closer to the appointed time, it feels as though a stone sits in the pit of your stomach. You should be safe here, but what if that madman was lying? What if no one is safe? What if the Axeman comes tonight regardless?
Welcome to Tales from the Graves, where shadows lurk and whispers echo.
Join us as we delve into the unknown, exploring tales of mystery, horror, and the supernatural.
Be prepared to journey into the darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Jess.
Together, we're the Graves Sisters, and we'll be your guides as we unearth the strange and unusual.
So find your flashlight, grab your shovel, and let's dig in.
The following podcast is rated for mature audiences.
It may contain graphic scenes of violence and explicit language that some may find disturbing.
Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to episode 5, Gravediggers.
I can't believe we made it to 5 episodes.
Yep. So last week, you got to hear all about the crazy MK Ultra stuff, right?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Which it definitely blew my mind, for sure. I'm sure you heard. This week, I'm going to be taking you on a journey to New Orleans again.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because vampires weren't enough, right?
Never enough.
Heck no. So New Orleans is a city with a rich history. There are tons of reasons to visit: the ghost tours, Mardi Gras, the food, and of course the absolute spooky vibes. With such a rich history, there are of course dark spots. And one of those, without a doubt, is the Axeman of New Orleans.
Ooh, like the sexy Axeman that was on the Coven American Horror Story.
Yeah, but I don't think he was necessarily sexy in real life.
Oh, well, that Axeman was sexy. Anyway, continue.
He terrorized New Orleans for over a year before just disappearing. The Axeman was referred to as America's own Bayou Jack the Ripper. I'm going to be focusing on the canonical victims first, as it is suspected that the Axeman traveled before arriving in New Orleans. And there are cases from years prior that do fit the MO, like really close, but they aren't like 100% sure. Little is known about the Axeman besides the physical descriptions from survivors, and even those vary from like case to case, which leads some to believe that these murders may be a result of multiple killers and not just one.
So Axemen, not Axeman.
Potentially.
Okay.
Yeah. Canonically, there are 12 known victims. Back in 1918, they weren't considered linked until several similar assaults happened. This is like way back even before our Texarkana killer was on the loose. Between about May of 1918 and October of 1919, the Big Easy was plagued by a series of brutal murders and assaults. These victims were attacked in their own homes with an axe, razor, or other sharp instruments, which usually belonged to the victims themselves. This guy was going to their homes. He wasn't really bringing anything with him.
Well, then how did he get the moniker Axeman if he was using other people's stuff?
So the thing is, back in 1918, everyone had a hatchet. You had like a kitchen hatchet to chop up wood to start your fire so you could cook. You had a hatchet outside or an axe outside to chop wood into smaller chunks or whatever. So almost everyone had an axe of some sort.
And it was just handy.
Oh, yeah, it was just handy. So, one linking factor that the Axeman's victims were people of Italian descent. So, they were either immigrants themselves, they came over, they're immigrating, and the New Orleans area was kind of popular for Italian immigrants, or they were Italian American. Maybe one of their parents was Italian and one of their parents was American, or maybe they're just a first-generation Italian-American kind of thing. So this leads some to believe that the murders were ethnically motivated. Some people also believe that it was the mafia.
Well,
Yeah. So in today's world, you can almost equate the dislike a portion of people had for the Italian immigrants to the dislike that a portion of people have, or I guess a portion of Americans have for immigrants from like Mexico or other countries. White Americans, and put that in quotations, saw these usually tanned skin, hello Mediterranean sun, men coming off boats and greeting their family warmly and by like hugging and kissing each other on the cheek. And
they got creeped out by it.
yeah, they were creeped out by it. So these men would take any job because one, they just arrived here, and most of the time they were either making money to send back home, or they were making money to stockpile it and then go back home themselves. Because over in America, there was a lot more opportunity. They were paying more. They were paying more than everything that was going on over in Italy at the time. These hard-working people took jobs in the sugarcane fields, alongside African Americans who had only been freed from slavery 53 years prior.
The wound was still fresh.
Absolutely. So to quote-unquote white Americans in the South, the Italians were no better than those that had been slaves and were just taking jobs away from upstanding yet poor white Americans.
They took our jobs!
Another thing is that a good number of these Italian immigrants, they worked and saved money to open their own businesses, such as grocers, butchers, shoe stores, anything. If they were staying in America, they were working hard jobs to make money to own their own business.
And setting their own roots.
Yep. And some people resented that they were able to do that. And it seemed like so easy, quote unquote, so easy. That's the leading theory, but it's also possible that the mafia was involved in some sort. Now, when I say mafia, I'm not talking the Godfather mafia. That didn't come about until like the 1920s.
Yeah.
So when I'm saying mafia, it wasn't, the secret criminal organization, but it was a form of social organization. So it was usually an upstanding gentleman, usually older, who was able to help take care of the people around him. So back in Sicily during this time, a lot of unrest, and these upstanding gentlemen would protect these families or their neighborhoods or whatever in exchange for money.
Yeah.
A mafiosi at the time wasn't exactly bad. There was even a petty extortion ring, which was not linked to the mafia, but for some reason people linked it to the mafia, called Black Hand crime. The Black Hand was usually a note delivered to a person with a drawing of a black hand on it saying, hey friend, I need you to pay me $200 or something bad will happen to you. For some reason, a lot of people thought that the Black Hand notes were a part of the mafia, but they weren't really. It was just thugs.
Yeah. Bullies.
Mm-hmm.
Give me your lunch money.
There are other theories that the crimes were sexually motivated because the Axeman was a sexual sadist. That's one of the theories that came out around that time. The theory comes from the fact that he was supposedly looking for female victims, and the only reason he killed men was because they obstructed his attempts to murder women. Yeah, I don't find that one as compelling because from all my research, yeah, he was probably a woman hater, but nothing of a sexual nature took place, or at least I couldn't find any evidence.
Yeah.
The least popular theory is that he did it all to promote jazz music. More on that later, though.
Yeah, I remember about that, about the history of him, but heck yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. So, getting to our victims, all right? On May 23rd, 1919, Joseph Maggio, an Italian grocer, and his wife, Catherine, were attacked while sleeping in their apartment. These apartments were usually attached either behind or above the place of business. The way the Axeman entered the home, it was kind of unusual. So you would think, oh, I'm going to break a window. I'm going to bust this door down. I'm going to pick this lock.
Did he come through like the fire exit on the side or something?
No. I don't think fire exits were really all that common until a little bit later.
Yeah.
He would take a chisel and take out one of the lower door panels, you know, those solid wood doors. He would just chisel it out, pop that bad puppy open, reach through, and unlock the door.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he's taken a lot of time to do this. He would remove his shoes outside so he could walk through the apartment as quietly as possible. He used a razor he found to slit both Joseph and Catherine's throats. Catherine's throat was cut so deeply that she was nearly decapitated.
Dang.
Yeah. The killer then bludgeoned the victims with the axe, and I found some conflicting reports on this, where he used both the blunt end, so not the blade of it, but the other end, the blunt end, to just smash them up, as well as some say that he did use the sharp end. But either way, but it's believed he did that to try and conceal the true cause of death.
Yeah, I can see that. Mess him up enough to where you can't tell what the heck happened. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to really pick out if it was a decapitation or not, or if it was like a razor. But, I mean, if it was that sharp of a cut and that deep of a cut, I mean, it's kind of hard to hide that.
Joseph survived the attack for a short while, but he died shortly after being discovered by his brothers, Jake and Andrew. Supposedly, the killer wrote a message on the nearby pavement. However, due to the sensationalism of the competing newspapers at the time, we don't know 100% what this message said. It could have been fabricated, even. We aren't 100% sure. The message was along the lines of, Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony, which was a reference to another Italian grocer, Anthony, and his wife, Joanna, I'm gonna butcher this, I'm so sorry, Sciambra, who were attacked back in 1911. Joanna did not survive. After doing the deed, the killer removed his bloody clothes and left them there at the scene of the murder, and it's speculated that he changed into clean clothes before fleeing. Back in 1918, police work was vastly different than what it is today. The police were basically at a loss unless they found eyewitnesses who could point out the killer. So the crime scene wasn't searched until the bodies were removed and found a blood-stained razor on the lawn of a neighboring property. What was the motivation for this horrible killing? Well, they ruled out robbery, as nothing of value or money was taken from the scene. Not even at the grocery store that they operated. Nothing was stolen from it.
That would have been a prime time to do it, too, whenever nobody could hear you rummaging around downstairs and come down and bust you.
Yeah. After doing some digging in regards to the razor found, it was discovered to potentially belong to Andrew, Joseph's brother. He owned a barber shop.
Oh.
How did they link it to him? Well, Andrew's employee, Esteban Torres, told police that Andrew had taken a razor from the shop a couple days prior and explained it was needing to hone the blade. So it was dull, it needed to be honed, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, it's a sharp-ass blade.
Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't almost decapitate a person.
That's how Andrew became a prime suspect. When questioned, Andrew, who lived in an adjoining apartment, said that he heard groaning noises through the wall at night, but then stated he didn't hear anything else from the actual attack. As he was intoxicated, police found that difficult to believe. Andrew advised the police that there had been an unknown man supposedly lurking near the apartment prior to the murders. And that's pretty much all we've got on that case.
So that's
2 victims.
2 victims so far.
Yep.
Okay.
It would be over a month before the Axeman struck again. On June 27th, 1918, Louis Bessemer and his mistress,
Scandal.
Harriet Lowe, were attacked in private quarters at the back of Bessemer's grocery store, another Italian grocer. Louis was struck by a hatchet just above his right temple, which caused a possible skull fracture. If you listened to episode 1, you should remember that it takes about 1,100 pounds of force to fracture a skull. Harriet got the worst of it, though. She was hacked over the left ear, which resulted in one side of her face being permanently paralyzed. They were discovered the following morning by a bakery delivery guy. He's doing his usual route. He's coming by. He's like, "Hey, I got bread for you." The hatchet in question was found in the adjacent bathroom from where they found Louis and his mistress. Louis told investigators that he had been sleeping when he was attacked. Harriet recalled the attacker being a mulatto man. And that's in quotations.
So mixed, right?
Yeah. It was a term used at the time for a person of mixed race, usually of African and European ancestry. The term is not used today for obvious reasons. But if you don't know, it's pretty freaking racist. And that's my opinion on it. Her statement was later discounted by the police due to her disoriented state, which they shouldn't have been questioning her in the first place, as the doctors had advised the police that she was on some heavy-duty painkillers and wouldn't be very reliable for questioning.
So they should have waited if they were going to ask anything.
Yeah, they should have waited. Almost immediately, however, police arrested Louis Obicon. He was a 41-year-old African-American man who had been employed at the store just a week prior to the attack. They had no evidence to link Louis to the attack, but being in the South in the early 1900s, they arrested him anyway, stating that he had given conflicting accounts about his whereabouts the morning of the attack. He was later released because police were unable to gather any evidence to actually hold him. This particular attack soon became a media circus. Harriet Lowe kept making scandalous and often false statements about both the attack and the character of Louis Bessemer. Louis then fell under suspicion of espionage following a discovery of foreign written letters in his possession. Harriet had apparently thought that he was a German spy, which resulted in his immediate arrest.
Whoa, confusing.
He was released 2 days later. He was arrested yet again when Harriet Lowe gave a deathbed confession. She died after a failed surgery that was meant to repair her facial paralysis that she sustained during the attack. She named Louis Bessemer as her assailant. He was then charged with murder and served 9 months in prison before being acquitted on May 1st, 1919, after only a 10-minute deliberation.
That is the shortest I've ever heard of.
So just a month later, on August 5th, I've sadly found conflicting accounts where it's both in the early hours of the morning as well as the early hours of the evening. I've also found conflicting information about the name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find any police records for this case because it happened in 1918. I'm going to go with Mary Schneider, but I've also seen that she could have been named Anne. But I'm going to go Mary.
Okay, let's do it.
Only 28 years old and 8 months pregnant as well, awoke to find a figure standing over her and was then bashed in the face repeatedly. Her scalp was cut open and her face was just drenched in blood. Mary was found just after midnight by her husband, Ed Schneider, when he returned home late from work. Mary claimed she remembered nothing of the attack, and 2 days later gave birth to a healthy baby girl, thankfully.
She lived?
Ugh. The husband, Ed, told the police that nothing had been stolen from the home besides $6 or $7 from a wallet. I found conflicting information where it was both his wallet and her wallet. So, from a wallet. And an axe was missing from their shed. In this case, the couple's apartment appeared to not have been forced into, and the police surmised that the bedside lamp was used in Mary's attack. During the investigation of this attack, police arrested an ex-convict, James Gleason, not long after Mary was found, but he was released shortly after due to lack of evidence. Again, this attack is the first time police had begun to consider these crimes connected. All victims had been attacked, some killed, with items that were either owned by the victims or stolen from nearby. They were attacked as they slept, and the vicious way that these crimes were committed seemed to point in a direction that whoever was committing these horrible crimes was just wanting one thing: blood.
Sounded like it.
So 5 days later, on August 10th, he's gone from having really long cool-off periods to all of a sudden it's just 5 days. Pauline and Mary Bruno were awoken by disturbing sounds coming from their uncle's bedroom. They went to investigate and found their uncle, Joseph Romano, had been struck over the head. From what I found regarding the attack, the hit was so violent that it was said to have sliced through to his brain. Pauline and Mary both saw the attacker flee the scene, but sadly were only able to recall minor details of appearance. Dark skin, heavy set, and he wore a dark suit and slouch hat. After his violent attack, Uncle Joseph, the badass he is, was able to walk to the ambulance that had been called for him. He died in the hospital 2 days later, however. He was old, especially for the time. I think he was 69, which back in 1918 was up there, right?
Yeah.
At the crime scene, police found that the panel in the back door had been chiseled free, just like in the first attack, and found a bloody axe in the backyard. This murder seemed to incite extreme chaos in New Orleans. Residents were living in constant fear of the Axeman. Police were almost overwhelmed with reports from citizens claiming to have seen the killer lurking in local neighborhoods. A few men even called police to report finding axes in their backyards. At this time, a retired Italian detective, John D'Antonio, made some public statements in which he hypothesized that the man committing these recent murders was the same as the one who killed several people back in 1911. He described the killer as someone who had dual personalities. He killed without motive. D'Antonio said it could be a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde scenario, where he could be normal, law-abiding citizen and just suddenly be overcome with an insatiable desire to kill.
Just snap.
Yeah. The murders that happened back in 1910 to 11 have never officially been connected to the Axeman murders, but the similarities are very striking. Maybe one day we'll go into those. The city of New Orleans was granted a welcome reprieve from the oppressive fear that the Axeman when no further murders happened, at least for a while. 7 months later, to the day, on March 10th, 1919, the Courtimingla family, Charles, Rose, and their 2-year-old daughter Mary, would become the next victims of the Axeman. That night, Rose awoke to find her husband fighting off an intruder in their room, but Charles would sadly not win. The intruder attacked both Charles and Rose, violently striking them over the head with the axe. They both sustained skull fractures as a result. That's when this attack went from terrifying to absolute tragedy. The attacker turned his sights to Mary, the Courtimingla's 2-year-old daughter. Mary died, being cradled in her mother's arms. Charles and Rose survived, but it has to be just almost a hollow existence after losing your child.
Yes, as a mother myself, I couldn't even imagine that.
Upon an investigation of the crime scene, the police found that, just like in the other cases, a panel in the back door had been chiseled out and a bloody axe was found on the back porch. Charles spent 2 days in the hospital, while Rose spent much longer. When she finally gained consciousness, the police put a lot of pressure on her to give them a name of the person who attacked her and her family. From the numerous videos I watched on this case, as well as a book that I was listening to at work, The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story by Miriam C. Davis, Rose was pressured heavily and gave her testimony under duress. She named Giordano and his 18-year-old son, Frank, as responsible for the attack. Giordano was a 69-year-old man and was in poor health, and his son, Frank, was more than 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds, so it would have been difficult for either of them to commit the crime. And despite Charles's denial of his wife's accusations, Giordano and his son were both arrested and charged with the murder of Mary Courtimingla. They would be found guilty, while his father, Giordano, received life in prison. Charles divorced his wife Rose after the trial. A year later, Rose finally admitted that she had falsely accused the Giordanos out of jealousy and spite. The families had apparently been having a dispute regarding the rental of a stall, which soured the relationship between them. Thankfully, the Giordanos were released shortly after Rose came clean. You remember earlier when I said that one of the theories behind the attacks was to promote jazz music?
Oh, yes. Is this where he tells people to... Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm about to read you a letter that the Axeman supposedly wrote to the Times-Picayune newspaper. It's dated Hale, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a fell demon from hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. When I see fit, I shall come again and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with the blood and brains of he whom I have sent below me. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with the blood and brains of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. If you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way in which they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid so as to amuse not only me, but His Satanic Majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they never were born than for them to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there's any need for such warning, for I feel that your police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished to, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I'm in close relationship with the Angel of Death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 o'clock earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans in my infinite mercy. I am going to make a little proposition to the people. Here it is. I'm very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose house a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for the people. One thing is certain, and that is some of those persons who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and as it is about time that I have left your homely earth, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or the realm of fancy. The Axeman. On Tuesday, March 18th of 1919, it was said that jazz bands were completely booked for the shows, and if you couldn't afford a band to come play at your home, you either played jazz music yourself or had a record on as loud as it could go. Dance halls were filled to the brim with people, and you could hardly go anywhere and not hear jazz music that night. As per the Axeman's statement, that if you were listening to jazz at the appointed time, no one would be visited by the Axeman that night, and no one was. Modern historians and detectives alike, even back then, didn't believe that the actual Axeman wrote the letter. It held far too many sophisticated words that your working-class citizen, which was what the survivors described, would have known those words, let alone be educated enough to know what Tartarus was from Greek mythology and history. Things seemed to calm down for a while, but New Orleans still lived in fear of the Axeman's return. And return he did about 5 months later. On August 10th of 1919, another Italian grocer, Steve Bocca, awoke during the night to find a dark figure standing over his bed, wielding an axe.
He doesn't like groceries.
No, I don't know, but it's just Italian grocers, I guess. So Steve was bludgeoned to unconsciousness. When he came to, Steve ran to the street and then to his neighbor, Frank. I'm gonna butcher this one too, man.
Just as bad as the Axeman.
I know.
All that butchering.
Frank Janusik. Oh, Jesus. Okay. There he collapsed again and lost consciousness. He was treated for his injuries, but sadly couldn't recall details about his attacker. But just like in the other cases, nothing was taken from his home, and the panels on the back door of his home had been chiseled out.
Oof.
Not even a month later, on September 2nd, William Carson, a druggist, today would be known as like a pharmacist, escaped the Axeman by firing several shots at the intruder who had broken into his home. The killer left a broken door and an axe behind. The next day, September 3rd, a young girl named Sarah Lawman was attacked with an axe while she was sleeping in her locked and shuttered home. So, like, she was locking her doors, shuttering her window. She was like, ain't no Axeman getting me. She was wrong. She was discovered by neighbors who came to check on her because she lived alone, found her unconscious on her bed. She had a severe head wound and was apparently missing several teeth. Oh, yeah. She did recover, but it's linked to the Axeman because her door had also been chiseled and an axe had been found on her front lawn. The city of New Orleans was quiet. No further attacks from the Axeman for almost 2 months. Until on October 27th, 1919, Mike Pepitone was murdered. That night, his wife heard noise. And again, there are conflicting reports here. It was either her husband's bedroom or the bathroom. She went to check and was just in time to see a large, axe-wielding man flee the scene. She found her husband lying in a pool of his own blood. He had been struck on the head, and there was blood splatter that covered most of the room.
Ooh, that was taking some power.
The Axeman did leave Mrs. Pepitone and their 6 kids alive.
Okay.
So, maybe he had a vendetta or something against Mike. I don't know. This was the last known attack of the Axemen. Allegedly, at least. The Axeman has been quite the popular figure throughout media. One of the more recent depictions is like you mentioned at the beginning. Season, 3 of of American Horror Story, Coven.
The best season.
Mm-hmm. In 1919, a local tune writer, Joseph John Davila, wrote a song, The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz, Don't Scare Me, Papa. The cover for this sheet music depicted a family playing music with frightened looks on their faces. A lot of historians believe that the Axeman traveled around before coming to New Orleans. The attacks were done in a very similar fashion, and at the time, in 1911, the killer was known as the Cleaver.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But in those particular cases, very similar, where he chiseled open, one of the back panels of the doors. He would hack them. I think the reason why he was dubbed the Cleaver is because he stole a meat cleaver from a nearby butcher for his first murder. I haven't dug too much into it. If you want more from that perspective, where people are pretty sure that those early attacks that happened were linked to the Axeman of New Orleans, the book that I told you about by Miriam C. Davis, The Axeman of New Orleans, The True Story, it digs real deep into those murders with a lot more detail than what I've provided to you here. It's a pretty good book, too. It's told in a more narrative perspective as opposed to just laying out the facts. So she's telling the story of everything that happened. It's not just here's what we're doing, which is laying out the facts, and this is what happened. They never caught the Axeman. Some speculated that he was arrested for a different crime altogether and was in jail, or he was killed himself, maybe during one of his next attack attempts,
Or do you think that maybe he could have just hopped on a train or something and just
that is another possibility.
Faded into nothingness? Or maybe he could have continued killing but with a different MO in a different town?
All of that's possible. Back in 1918 to 1919, police work was shoddy at best. Like I said, they mostly relied on eyewitness testimony. And back then, they would just pretty much force you to tell them information. And I don't know what happened. I really don't know what happened. Blah, blah, blah. And you know who did it! And basically coerce either confessions out of people or get them to just name anybody. Because what mattered back then was closing the case, getting their guy.
Yeah, even if it was the wrong guy.
Yeah, even if it was the wrong guy. But, I guess we'll never know what actually happened to this person, the Axeman, or the Axemen, if there was more than one murderer about. For now, I'm gonna just lay this one to rest and hope that one day we'll be able to find out what really happened in and around New Orleans back in 1910-11 all the way through 1919. Maybe we'll find out.
If you like what you heard, please feel free to follow, like, rate, and review Tales from the Graves podcast on your preferred listening platform.
We also would like to know what you think and what topic you suggest we unearth next. Email us at talesfromthegravespod@gmail.com or reach out to us at Tales from the Graves podcast on Instagram.
And if you have Discord, join us in the graveyard. The link is in our bio on our Instagram as well as this listening platform. Thanks again, Grave Diggers.